You've been speaking with this prospect for the last hour, the rapport is off the charts, you are absolutely certain that this person is going to buy from you, and all of a sudden, they say, let me think about it.
Dude! What the
Until we learn how to handle objections, the likelihood of getting clients to sign up after they've gotten off the call without a commitment is very low. I'm Abraham. I'm a top sales strategist for Tony Robbins and Dean Graziosi. I've sold over 7 figures in coaching programs in the last 10 years. Today, I'm going to show you how you can handle objections like a pro. Check it out. Now, what is an objection? An objection is a doubt, a fear, a worry, a question that a prospect might have. In other words, something that is preventing a prospect from moving forward. I'm going to lean into a framework that was proposed by a woman named Barry Baumgartner. I got to give respect where respect is due. Barry is absolutely incredible. She, for the last 20 years, have worked with some of the greatest coaches in the industry and have helped them to scale and grow their business. So what I love about Barry is that after 20 years of seeing all the objections that have come up at live events, she's sort of categorized them into 5 main categories. Number 1, time. Number 2, money. Number 3, spouse. Number 4 is fear. And then the 5th is shame/self-doubt. So we're going to take a look at those 5 and how to handle them using Barry's framework with a little bit of Abraham Heisler flourish on top. So before we get into the framework, we got to understand that objections happen along a continuum, meaning if somebody says money is a challenge, well, that can mean, hey, I'm sleeping under the bridge and I don't have a dime to my name, or I have the money, I'm just a little hesitant to use it. So we have to ask some questions in order to really understand where the prospect is at, in order to meet them where they're at and help to empower them to move forward. So when somebody presents an objection, the first thing that we want to say is, tell me more. Now, why is that so powerful? 1, because we're not coming at them and opposing them. In fact, quite the opposite. If you've ever seen the martial art Aikido, when somebody throws a punch, you don't throw a punch back, you take that energy and you move with it. And that's exactly what we're doing, because when it comes to handling objections, it can be a very tense situation. Somebody's tensing up, maybe there's some shame involved, maybe there's some fear, some doubt. So the first thing that you're gonna say is something like, tell me more, meaning you wanna learn more. When somebody says something, it doesn't mean it's necessarily final. And that's one of the biggest mistakes a lot of people that are new to sales make. If somebody says, wow, that's a lot of money, and the salesperson says, oh yeah, it's a lot of money, okay, they back off, right? No, instead we're gonna do something different. We're gonna take a different tack. When you say it's a lot of money, tell me more. What do you mean by that? Never assume. It's important to emphasize that. Never assume, because we don't know. And it's important to allow them to have whatever process that they're having. So tell me more is 3 simple words that you can say to allow your prospect to open up and share more about their situation, because no objection is final. Now, the second thing that we need to do is we want to isolate objections, meaning if somebody is saying, ooh, yeah, I don't know, the timing might not be the right fit, we want to ask questions in order to really find out, is it timing? Because if it's timing, we can talk about that. But what often happens in these sales conversations is that people use objections as a red herring. What does that mean? A red herring is something that you put out there and have people go towards that thing in order for you to escape out the back door. And we're not even aware that we're doing it. That's the craziest thing, is we're just putting stuff out there, but subconsciously we're freaking out and there's something else that's happening. So we really want to make sure that the objection that we're handling is the right objection, because if we're chasing a red herring, again, we're going to lose the sale. So the best way to do that is with what is called a temperature check. A temperature check basically allows you to check in with the person and say, okay, time aside, money aside, objection aside, do you really want to do this program, yes or no? In other words, you're always coming back to desire. If somebody doesn't want to do the program in the first place, well, that's another issue. We got to talk about that. And honestly, if you're following the right sales strategy or sales process, it shouldn't even come to that part of the call, because that is something that you handle earlier on. So we want to isolate the objection. And the best way to do that is say, hey, objection aside, whether it's time, money, spouse, whatever it is this something that you absolutely want to do? Is there something on what I said, or is there something else that is getting in the way of you feeling like you really want to do this? Oftentimes, when we handle objections, they really want the program, but they don't have the empowerment to say yes. There's some fear holding them back. There's some sort of false belief that they have that's stopping them from saying yes. So if they say, yes, it really is just time, or it really is just money, or whatever it is, well, then we can go in and we can handle that objection. But the third piece doesn't even matter until we've isolated what the objection is. Now, once we've figured out exactly what is stopping people from moving forward, well, that is the only time in the call that we can start coaching people. Yes, I said it. The number one reason why a lot of coaches struggle with sales is because they just want to start coaching, but you end up filling up someone's cup and giving them the false sense that they can do it on their own. So in order to avoid that, we don't want to coach at all up until this point of the conversation. This is the only time in your sales conversation, if you're following this methodology of selling, that you actually want to coach somebody. And it's a way to empower them to replace an old belief or a false belief with a more empowering belief. By the way, speaking about following a proper sales structure, you can download for free my 3X sales framework. This is a PDF with a roadmap of the same sales structure that I've used to close over 7 figures in coaching clients. It's available at abrahamheisler.com, and I'll drop the link below. Let's take a look at what it's like to shift some of these perspectives using Barry's frameworks of time, money, spouse, fear, and shame. So number one, time. Time, if you think about it, really comes down to priorities. Ain't nobody got time for that. We all have the same amount of hours in the day. If somebody says, I don't have time to do this, it means that it's not a priority. If all of a sudden your kid or somebody that you really cared about was in a terrible accident and went to the hospital, you would drop whatever you're doing. So it's all about priority, in which case it's important to do a bit of a priorities audit. So when somebody's saying, I don't have time, I might start asking them questions about their time. Well, where are you spending your time? When you say that this is important to you, but now is not the right time, well, how long has it been? How long have you been struggling with this? How long have you been saying that you want to do something about this and putting this off? Do you see this getting better on its own? If you go back to doing the same thing you've always done, are you going to get a different result? These are all questions that we can ask when somebody is saying time is the reason why they're not moving forward. The second is money. I love the money objection because I grew up in New York City, and I grew up with kids that had a lot of money. I grew up with kids that didn't have a lot of money. And what was really interesting is that even kids that didn't have a lot of money always managed to have the flyest pair of kicks, meaning the newest shoes or the newest phone, or, well, I grew up before phones were out, but whatever it is. In other words, it comes back to priority. And the priority for a lot of kids that I was growing up with was status. So it didn't matter. When it comes to money, it's really a conversation of resourcefulness. How resourceful are you willing to get? Because if you're expecting all of this to happen within your comfort zone, well, it's probably not going to happen. Otherwise, it would have happened already, meaning that you have already gotten the result that my program helps you to get. So we have to get a little uncomfortable. And that might mean asking a friend for a loan, or putting it on a credit card, or doing something that feels a little bit uncomfortable potentially. And that's okay. Maybe it's, I have the money in the bank account and I don't really want to part with it, but I'm willing to. I can't tell you how many people I've helped handle that objection around money and sell them into the program, and they're grateful. Oh my God, Abe, thank you so much for coaching me and standing up for me and not backing down. Money was something I was afraid about, but it was the best investment I ever made. Now, of course, obviously, your program, whatever it is that you're selling, ideally, you want that to be something that is of absolute value. And if you don't believe that it's absolutely of value and worth it, well, then that's a bigger problem that we have on our hands, that they're going to get so much more value in return. And so asking questions about resourcefulness. Now, that oftentimes is enough to move the needle forward and get somebody to say, you know what, you're right. I'm just going to put it on this card, or I'm just going to move some money around. Other times, people might have to get a little resourceful. Now, the next objection that comes up is spouse and partner. I'm married, I love my wife. I'm obviously not going to make a huge financial decision without having a conversation with her. However, it's important to ask this one question. Are you asking your spouse or your partner for support or for permission? That's a tough one, right? Because when it comes to spouse, partner, oftentimes that is something that we'll hide behind. We'll use it as a smokescreen. In other words, if a prospect is a little bit nervous about moving forward and they think, you know what, I'm just going to go to my spouse and put the onus of the decision on somebody else so I don't have to make that uncomfortable decision. Well, if you let them get off the call in that state, then you're doing a great disservice to them. It's important to have that conversation with your prospect and ask questions like, on a scale from 1 to 10, how badly do you want to do this? What if your spouse says no? What if your spouse doesn't agree? What if your spouse thinks this is a crazy idea? Do you still want to do this? How would you respond in that case? Or what if your spouse is like, oh yeah, totally do it. Are you ready to move forward today? Having those types of conversations. If you're going to go have that conversation, I totally get it. But how are you going to approach your spouse? Are you going to approach them with this sort of like tail tucked between the legs, kind of shy and bashful and like, what do you think? Or are you going to come at them with absolute certainty and say, hey, babe, I really want to do this thing. I'm asking for your support. And the way you approach it is obviously going to elicit a different response from your partner or your spouse. And lastly, what I like to do is I like to get a deposit on the call to honor their commitment, honor their decision. It's a refundable deposit. If the spouse and the prospect speak and say, hey, it's not the right time, let's do it another time. But it's also important to honor that feeling, that sense of commitment that they feel when they're saying, yes, 10 out of 10, this is exactly what I want to do. Now, fourth is fear. Nothing great happens in your comfort zone. There's always going to be fear involved. And there's people that really struggle with facing that fear. And you as a salesperson, as a person of influence, this is your opportunity to step up and to ask empowering questions that's going to get somebody out of their comfort zone. Because at the end of the day, if you do the same thing that you've always done, you're going to get what you've always got. And so we have to get uncomfortable. If it was comfortable to make change, to make transformation, well, then everybody would be walking around entirely enlightened. All problems would be fixed. It doesn't work that way. We have to make short-term sacrifices for long-term gains. And so it's important to ask certain questions like, hey, what's going to change? If you didn't do this, what would you prefer? Would you prefer a life where you hide every time you're at the point or the precipice of transformation and growth, and at the end of the life you're looking back and realizing you never really showed up for yourself? Or do you want to move through life with bravery? And yeah, of course that means that sometimes you're going to fall or sometimes you're going to make the wrong decision, but at least you made a decision, and in that way you can learn from those decisions. You know, one of my favorite books as an entrepreneur is Think and Grow Rich, and in one of the chapters Napoleon Hill writes that successful people are quick to make decisions and slow to change them, where unsuccessful people are slow to make decisions but quickly change them when they do. So if somebody is looking to become successful in some area of their life, well, which framework do you want to follow? Do you want to act like a successful person and make a decision, even if it's the wrong decision, and learn from it? Or do you want to take time making a decision and never actually taking action? So ultimately, nothing great was ever achieved without getting uncomfortable and facing fear. And the last objection that we're going to talk about today is shame or self-doubt. I've tried this in the past. It didn't work. I'm worried that I'm going to say yes and it's not going to work out and then I'm going to look silly. Let me ask you a question. When a baby learns how to walk, it falls down. Do the parents say, I guess that baby's just not a walker? No, of course they encourage the baby. That's okay, you fell down, get back up again, let's keep going. Just because you failed in the past doesn't mean that that has to determine your future. You can make this happen. In fact, nothing great ever happens on the first try. It usually takes multiple tries. You have to do it again and again to really get it. And one of my favorite questions to ask somebody who's coming at me with that shame, self-doubt, I've tried this in the past, it didn't work, is I put it on them and I say, okay, well, if we work together, I don't want to repeat the past. So you tell me, how is this time going to be different? Allow them to sell you. Now, there are other objections outside of the Barry's framework, like the do it your self-objection, which means somebody is like, this is great, but I'm going to do it myself. There's multiple other objections we can get into, but we're just going to stop there for today. So to recap, when we're handling objections, there's 3 things that we want to do. Number 1 is we want to say, tell me more. Explain, say more. We want to elicit more from the person. Number 2 is we want to isolate. So objection aside, is this something that you absolutely want? If yes, then let's have a conversation about it. If no, then why are we talking about this in the first place? And the third is that we want to actually handle objection, which really comes down to coaching, shifting perspective, replacing a false belief or a limiting belief with a more empowering one. And according to Barry, the 5 main objections that she's come across are time, money, spouse, fear, and shame. If this has been helpful, then like and subscribe, join the sales revolution. Let's launch and grow your business together. Until the next one, make some money, have some fun, and change some lives.